All right, in this video, I'm going to go through and show some different ways to solve quadratic equations, depending on how the equation is set up and depending on what your preference is for some options. Okay, the sheet that I'm working off of has 8 questions on it, so I'm going to go ahead and do one video for the odd questions, and then I'll go back and do another video for the even questions to keep the videos a little bit on the short side. So let's take a look at the odd questions first. Directions for all of these just say to simply solve the following quadratics. So no particular method is dictated to you. You can pick. So question number 1, x squared minus 7x minus 8 is equal to 0. This is written in standard form. As a reminder, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. And as long as a is not equal to 0, you have a quadratic written in standard form. In standard form, I look for one of two things. First thing I look to see is, can I factor it? So let's check. To factor this, I would look to multiply to -8, and then I want to add to -7. So let's see if I can make that happen. What multiplies to -8? So x, how about -8 and +7? Yep, that'll work. So that multiplies correctly and that adds correctly. Now, if you don't factor or you can't factor and you're in standard form, the other option, personal preference, would be to do quadratic formula. If I can factor, I'm going to factor. All right. So once it's in factored form, set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So these two little mini equations here, we're going to get x is equal to 8, and then separately we'll get x is equal to -1, and so here are your two answers. You could also choose to write your answers as x is equal to 8, -1. You could put a little comma between them. One word of caution, please do not write your answer with parentheses around it. This notation with the parentheses means one of two things. It either means that this is an ordered pair, the point 8, -1, which that's not what we mean when we solve, or it means the interval from 8 to -1, which is again not what we mean when we're solving. So make sure you just write a list out, 8 comma -1 or whatever else you have for your answers, or write it out separately as 8 x is equal to 8, x is equal to -1. Any of those is fine. Just no parentheses, please. All right, so problem number 1 is done. I'm going to go ahead and scroll on down to number 3 and see what we can do with that one. Number 3 is also in standard form. Great. Again, I'm going to try and see if I can factor it. Things I want to be careful about. There is a 3 in front, so that means my factoring is going to be a little bit different. So either you can guess and check it, which is what I'm going to do. So let's go ahead and split up that 3x. I'll also split up the 6. So 3 and 2 minus plus. I'll check that in a second. The other option, if you have a method, guess and check isn't your favorite thing, you can also do AC factoring or advanced factoring. And the other option, of course, is if you don't want to factor at all, use the quadratic formula. I'm going to take a second here just because I want to make sure I did factor this correctly. I'm going to multiply it out really quickly. So 3x squared minus 9x plus 2x minus 6. Those two will absolutely combine to make a -7x. So yes, I have the right factors in the right places. Once I know my factors are correct, I'm going to go ahead and set each factor equal to 0. And solve these two little miniature equations. So 3x is equal to -2, x is equal to -2/3. Leave your answers as fractions, please and thank you. Unless the directions say otherwise, which they generally won't. So two answers here. X is equal to -2/3. Again, please leave the fraction. And then x is equal to +3. The only thing that you might have to do with fractions every once in a while, reduce them if you need to, okay? So that's problem number 3, all said and done. Let's go ahead and scroll on down and see what number 5 has to offer us. All right, negative 2t squared minus 11 is equal to 5. Again, things I'm noticing. This is not in standard form, right? It's not equal to 0. And you'll notice I highlighted that t squared because that's the only variable in this problem. And since it's the only variable in this problem, instead of doing this quadratic formula, I'm going to see if I can isolate that t squared and use a square root to solve for it. So negative 2t squared is equal to positive 16. I'm going to divide both sides here. So t squared is equal to negative 8. At this point, I have isolated the variable. And then to completely solve for that variable, I'm going to go ahead and take a square root of both sides. Okay. The opposite operation to squaring something is to take its square root. So the left side is just going to be t. The right side has some things we got to pay attention to. I just put the square root in the problem, so I need to make sure I include a plus or a minus. Both positive and negative numbers squared will turn into positives. Okay. I also have a negative underneath my radical, so things to be careful about. I'm going to pull it out. All right. So you can do this with roots. Negative 1 times 8 is negative 8, so I haven't changed my value. Mathematically, we have a definition that we talk about here. So it's going to be negative 1. The square root of negative 1 is equal to I. That is a mathematical definition in the same way that we've defined pi. Some of you may know tau from possibly physics. There's a number e. So all of those things that we've defined in math, I is another definition. I is just defined as the square root of negative 1. So using that definition, and, all right, I'm also going to break up that root 8. All right, so square root of 4 and square root of 2. So this is going to be 2 root 2. All right, so mathematically, we're going to do the conventional way to write this, which is to put the numeric part first, 2 root 2, and then the imaginary, that's the I value, the imaginary part, component, last. I tend not to write my answers this way because I have a bad habit of making that square root sign way bigger than it should be. And so oftentimes my square root will enclose the I underneath the square root. And that's a problem mathematically. So alternatively, you can write your answer, and I have seen this many places, this isn't just Miss Curran made it up, okay? So alternatively, you put the non-root part first, so 2 in the I, and then the root part at the end. So whichever way you write it, mathematically, they are 100% the same thing. This first answer in purple, 2 times root 2 times I, this is all multiplication. And so 2 times I times root 2, you have the same components. The order on multiplication just doesn't matter. Okay, so this particular method ultimately comes down to solving by square root. Yes, we have the imaginary component here in simplifying the root, but the method itself was solving with a square root. All right, let's go ahead and take a look down at number 7 here, which will be the last problem for this video. We've got x squared plus 12x plus 13 is equal to 0. Standard form, that's nice. I'm going to try and factor it in my head, and my head says no, all right? My brain says definitely not. It looks like something that could work, right? What multiplies to 13? Well, 1 and 13. Oh, I can use a 1 and a 13 to make a 12, except, I'll go ahead and show this. If I try and use a 1 and a 13 to make a 12, right? 13 minus 1 makes 12, great. If I go to multiply this, 13 times negative 1, I don't make a positive 13 here. And there's no way to, mess around with the signs here or adjust the signs to make a positive 12 and a positive 13. So, yep, not going to work. And so if I can't factor it, that's fine. It's just not factorable. But that doesn't mean I can't solve it. That's something sometimes students get worked up about. I shouldn't say worked up, but they get hung up on, is that, yes, it's okay that you can't factor it, but you still have to be able to solve it. So solving in this case is going to require the quadratic formula. And if you have not memorized the quadratic formula, I'm going to go ahead and write off to the side here. X is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over, whoops, 2a. All right, so that's the quadratic formula. If you have memorized it, awesome. If you want to memorize it, great. We'll talk about if it's required for the summative or not in a little bit. And then basically, from your standard form equation, identify A, B, and C. So A is 1, B is 12, C is 13. And these values are going to be used as replacements in here. All right, so let's see what we got. We've got X is equal to the opposite of B. So opposite of 12 is negative 12, plus or minus the square root of, so that's going to be 12 squared minus 4 times A times C, all over, and yes, it is all over, 2A. Okay? So a little bit of cleanup here. Let's make this look a little bit nicer for us. Let's see. Everything that is under this square root, so the 12 squared minus 4 times 1 times 13, put all of that in your calculator, and you're going to get 92. All right, denominator here, 2 times 1 is 2. Now, 92 is not a perfect square. You can put it in your calculator and check. You're going to get an answer of 9 point something when you try and take its square root. So instead of trying to take its square root, which will get us a decimal, I want to see if I can break up the root using a perfect square. Perfect square of 4 lives inside of 92, lives inside there 23 times. Let me do a quick, yep, okay, just double check that. So root of 4 turns into 2, and root 23 just stays root 23. It's a prime number, so it's okay. So X is equal to negative 12 plus or minus 2 root 23 all over 2. And the last step that I'm going to be looking for is, can we divide this? Okay, my numerator has 2 terms. I have a negative 12, that's a single term, and then 2 root 23 is its own term. And if I'm going to try and divide here by this denominator, I need to make sure that both parts of the numerator can be equally divided by that denominator. And in this case, they can. So X is equal to negative 6 plus or minus root 23. And that is as simple as this answer gets. Okay, so yes, leave that answer as your final evaluation there. Okay, so I hope this video has helped show you some different methods on how to solve equations that are quadratics, whether you can factor them, take a square root, or in the last case here of this last problem, solve with the quadratic formula. All right, I'll pop up a second video for the even questions.